Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicated to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 29 of Lit Happens. Today, we are focusing on cracking Module B for your trial examination preparations. We're going to talk about all things Band 6 exam strategy for the HSC. But before we get into that, welcome back to Adriel, and we're going to get into our little quip. Before we do that, how are you, Adriel? How's things?
Good, thank you. I'm good, thank you. 29 episodes in, we're ready to keep rambling and keep producing our material. It's good.
That's it. And so when we're hopefully uploading this episode, you guys are back in the swing of things with term 3 underway. We know that most schools are doing their trials, hence our trial S.O.S episodes. So we are going to do Module B today. And right before we get into that, we're going to do our lit and quick question, which is, what do you prefer as an English teacher? Critical writing or creative writing? Oh, is this as an English teacher, Adriel, or just personal preference?
Probably English teacher. I don't know how many people like creative or critical writing outside of the realm of English teachers.
A lot of people like to journal.
Well, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Look, could be for anyone really. Then, if we look at it through that scope, but little quit, critical or creative writing. I am more in the field of the critical thinking. I love my critical writing, just the way you can look at texts and just explore the whys and the hows in which they sort of do it. In saying that, like I said, I've been making creative writing for the last few years now in the HSC, so it's given me a little bit of a greater appreciation for the creative writing. However, I'm more of the critical lens. Like if you look at my library at home, I'll probably be looking more at your non-fiction type texts, which just explore the whys of the world and the hows of how things sort of happen. So that does translate then to my teaching and, my style of writing, I would say.
Lovely. That's nice. Yeah, you are very into the more essays and the more fact-based memoirs and stuff like that. So that's really cool.
Okay.
I think I used to prefer critical, especially in my first several years of teaching, because I just felt that came very naturally to me and I had that confidence in that. And I think in the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot more reading, and not just reading just for like the pleasure and all of that, but just like also reading for that understanding of like storytelling and narrative. And I feel like I'm starting to tap into that a bit more. And so I've been getting really, really excited lately with the creative writing, which is interesting because I never thought, given a question like this, I would pick creative. But I think I've definitely, I think with time and with my own confidence in, creative writing, and not just the strategy behind creative writing, but how you like encourage, aesthetic ideas and how you encourage imagination. I think I'm starting to lean a lot more into the creative writing, which is a surprise even for me.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's interesting. There's an appreciation of all types of, I guess, styles of writing.
Course.
But look, we each have our own sort of ways into the text, and it's interesting how it sort of chops and changes over the course of our teaching journey.
Yeah, that's really true. Well, let's get into our episode for today then on Module B of the trials. So the first thing we want to take our listeners through today, whether they're teachers or students, is how to unpack a Module B essay question using, the rubric, because that's where all our questions come from, but particularly under exam pressure. Because I think, Adriel, that's the real difference here is, when we're doing it in a classroom, we might be discussing a question, we might be modeling it, before when an assessment comes out, we might engage in a little bit of a breakdown with the students. And that is obviously very different within examinations conditions, because a student is having to do that not only independently and entirely under the on the spot, but obviously deeply within these very strict 40-minute timeframes for each of the sections of paper 2. So I think the first thing is for all the listeners to be aware when we're looking at Module B, what the question is always going to come from an aspect of the rubric. And so that, I think, is the first strategy. Is always the starting point is the rubric. What are the key parts of Mod B? Is whatever the student prepared aligned with that? And then when a student is interpreting a question in unseen exam conditions, I think that first thought probably should be connecting back to the rubric. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. They need to know the terminology or the lexicon of the rubric. As we sort of always say in our teaching, know your rubric inside out. We generally spend maybe a lesson or two, maybe a lesson, depending on the length of your periods, just going through and unpacking all the language in the rubric, especially the first 2 paragraphs, I would say, is often where we sort of find the meat of what is generally asked in the HSC questions.
Yeah.
But make sure your students are engaging with those rubric terms. Very, very important. I think that's quite important for them to sort of really even get them to like consider like what types of questions would you develop, if you're looking at some of those rubric terms. If we go to say the Mod B part here, which is a critical study of literature, or if you're looking at it in terms of the standard lens, you're looking at the close study of literature, which is in essence the same thing, just the accessibility of texts are different. We are getting students to consider the language, what is being asked of us. So engage with those rubric terms, because that's often what your question will be like. Look at the theme. So what themes or distinctive ideas can we start to see in the rubric, or what could you gather? So for example, like if we went back to something like the initial study of text and human experiences, we know that a lot of the themes will be about the human experience. What does it mean to be human? Identity, all those sorts of things. And you'll see words like identity actually translate into the study of these texts in the closed study as well. Identity, what it means to be human, the things to do with being human, like these are the themes that you'll generally see. So you can really get the kids to maybe annotate on the side before getting into that exam. Some of these ideas that they can then move into the exam with a bit of confidence with. Very, very important. So yeah, the unpacking process, I guess you're looking at the simple things. What are those directive verbs? And I mean, we keep harping on about this. We've looked at a lot of that language, and generally it'll start off with like an identify, and explain, analyze, and evaluate. That's generally the progression that we see in a lot of the rubric statements. So what is it that we're sort of mapping in a way for our students to really get them to consider. Now, again, because this is a close and critical study of the text, at the back of your mind, you're probably saying, well, hey guys, you're looking more at the critical analysis or the critical evaluation. We're not really just going to be identifying or explaining. But I mean, the identify and the explain part might just be in the initial notes, but they have to build off of that and move it more towards that analysis and evaluation. So yeah, like there's a few things for them to unpack it, but the key things is identifying, those key parts in terms of the verbiage, the language, the themes. I didn't discuss the form here, but we can look at the form as well. Maybe you might want to add a little bit into what the form might look at. But yeah, and then text-specific things as well. So what is relevant to your text? So, I mean, you and I have done Ishiguro's Artists of the Floating World in the last few years of our teaching, and we definitely know that a lot of that text revolves around, this idea of memory, constructions of the past. We're looking at like the way we sort of, culpability. You're looking at considered cultural practices and the way they sort of develop and how they influence identity. So like these are sorts of ideas that you can consider, and I'm sure they translate across multiple texts, but your text specific knowledge has to be detailed. So that will often be elicited through the Module B rubric here that we will consider. But yeah, there's a few sort of things. And again, it goes back to what we've sort of been harping on about recently. Get them to write Get them to write out the questions, get them to write out the verbs, write. And the more they
Yeah.
do it, the more they'll be comfortable with. Rather than just like reading it, they have to be writing and applying themselves as they do go through it. So that definitely does help with the unpacking, I guess, of the Module B essay questions, and making sure they understand the rubric descriptors, so that they can,
Definitely.
do those exams with at least a lesser level, I guess, of stress. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think you touched on as well the fact that the question might be a very specific type of question. So it could be just a generic rubric question in which whatever sort of rubric thesis you already have might already fit quite nicely, and you might not have to mold or manipulate or change your response too much. Like it might flow and work. You also mentioned how it can be a bit of a form-based question, which is really asking students to lead. I think the way that I explain it is to lead with the way that form is shaping their own personal insight and understanding. You also then touched on really well when you looked at Ishiguro's with idea-based questions, and the fact that there's a certain like frame or notion or concept that is meant to help encourage the student to respond according to. And then, you might also get your very text specific questions. So, if you're looking at T.S. Eliot's poetry in Mod B, it might be asking them to explore like disillusionment or something like that. Like you're talking about Ishiguro, it might be asking them to more specifically explore the role of memory or something like that. So I think it's really good, like you said, right, because the only way the students are going to practice with engaging with these types of questions is if they're being forced to workshop that in writing. So those were some really, really great strategies. Yeah, thank you. We might then get into the next section. So the next question we want to ask, how might we encourage or support students to build a strong thesis statement that reflects the rubric and answers the question, but also, considering this is exam conditions, is timely and is done kind of within, I guess, like the first few minutes, where a student might be building a plan? Like, what are some suggestions we might have to encourage that building of that strong thesis in that really short time frame?
No. So just building off of what we sort of looked at in the last or the previous question, they need to know their rubric, and they use that as sort of a foundation in which they sort of start to address the needs of their thesis. So remember, a thesis is like a main argument. Consider things like the modality of language. We need to be looking at elements, especially in the Module B rubric. We're looking at textual integrity, since it is a critical study or a close study. We want that informed personal response, and we're looking at the value as well. Like, how does the text resonate? How does it how does that idea resonate throughout time, throughout paradigms? Those different patterns that we sort of see in the world. And these are different elements that we want our students to really consider with, which will allow them to move away or step away from that generic, vague thesis, and also get the marker really knowing that they have a good understanding of the whole text. Because if they are receiving like an unseen question and they provide just the text explores this important idea, blah blah blah, like it's a form of a thesis, but really anyone can write that. You're just rewording the question.
That's right.
Whereas if you know your text as you should do with a critical study, if you've known the rubric elements, as we sort of touched on previously, you have these nuanced sort of personal informed responses, which will get you into that sophisticated sort of band. So we are working towards developing those sophisticated thesis statements where we will really consider things like the form, the author, the composer's context, I would say, those ideas, how have they been really reflected? And then also the textual integrity, which is quite important. I think when we're looking at like thesis statements as well, like if you get into a band 5 response, a lot of students will generally base the thesis statements based on like the construction of the text. So they'll look at techniques. So techniques effectively convey an enduring value or whatever. Remember, we want to be a little bit more sophisticated when we are considering this. how do we do this in under 5 minutes? Well, you need to know your text, you need to know the rubric, and you need to be able to understand what the question is asking of you. So again, as a teaching strategy, what you might do is you might give them a series of questions and, go 5 minutes at a time. All right, 5 minutes, bang. Plan very quickly, spend 2 minutes planning, underlining the keywords, and then how would you write a quick thesis statement? Have a Google timer up on the board and off you go. Sort of, that would be my way of doing it, but give them those thesis statements or give them questions. You might even give them thesis questions and then say, how would you adapt this to the question? And then really get them to start practicing. We really talk about the role of writing. So yeah, maybe even give them a blueprint in terms of how to structure a thesis. So you might, consider the form, the language, the structure, like give them like different points when you're talking about the scaffold there. And then, how does it align with some of those rubric aligned ideas there? And then what is that personal or purposeful sort of insight that they gain from, I guess, the study of the text? So those are some of those important things. But yeah, the rapid thesis sort of construction there, the more they do it, the more that they build confidence. So
yeah.
It's something that comes with practice and sort of petition over time.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a real process, isn't it? Like any student who thinks they're just going to get in there and smash it and fluke it, it never works in their favor. And a lot of the students that do get band 5 and 6 results, they will say, oh yeah, I don't fluke a thing. Like I prepare, I do their time conditions, I really try and simulate what it's going to be like. And I think you had a good point as well about having a generic or concept-based kind of rubric that obviously then you must inject the specifics of the question and make it more direct, because I think most students require that, and it saves them a lot of time because it limits the thinking of those basic principles and gets them to just focus a bit more on, the direction of the question. So even something like for Module B, through the deliberate use of form and language, the author constructs a text of enduring in value that invites a personal and critical response through its reflection of integrity and significance. And this might be nice just even in the trial prep phase to put that on the board and see what your students do with that. Because I think sometimes students, they have a personal response, but it takes them a while to get the wording or idea of it. So I think one strategy might be if you put something generic and then that takes the pressure off, and then they're solely focusing on their personal interpretation. And then, because I think a lot of students, like I know the ones that you and I have taught that have performed really well, they go in with skeletons anyway. So there's a skeleton, like part of that skeleton would be something like a general kind of thesis, which is generally aligned to what analysis they want to use and in what way. But then obviously your band 6s will make sure it's really specific and fine-tuned to what the question is asking. So lots of really, really good strategies there. Thanks, Adriel. Well, let's look at question 3 then. I guess the next part of that Module B response under exam conditions is the paragraphs. So how would the students plan paragraphs quickly in that time condition without hopefully without sacrificing the depth or the complexity or, how nuanced their analysis might be?
I guess the quick way we sort of look at this is making sure they know that they are comfortable with their writing platform. So whether it be pedal, peel, till, whatever it is, like making sure your students are comfortable with that. And the only way you get comfortable with that is, again, and we keep harping on about this, is just repetition. The more you do it to get the reps in, the better they are going to get at doing it. So that would be my number one key for efficiency. I mean, even if you compromise a little bit of your content teaching, even in preparation for the trials, where you think, oh, but I need to get this done, like I would throw that out the window and really just focus on writing. Spend a lot of your time in class writing. And I mean, it's a bit sort of you're teaching towards the exam, but in essence, that's what we want our kids to, work on, because exam craft is very, very, it's like a neglected skill that we often don't teach the students enough. to experience. And then it's like the first time they actually sit in a trial examination or prelim. It's like really the trial HSC is the first big exam that a kid will sit in, you know, writing 3 to 4 essays in those timed conditions. Whereas if they've been continually working on this through the term, you'll start to see, you know, the way that they plan their paragraphs will become a lot more efficient when it comes into, you know, the exam situation there. So I would often say, you know, have that skeleton structure. You mentioned this just previously there. A lot of students will have that skeleton structure, which they can base maybe 2 to 3, I would say around 3 paragraphs based around those rubric sort of ideas. You know, the rubric ideas are the things not pertaining just to techniques, but, you know, they're the big concepts, maybe things to do with context, ideas aligned with key language in terms of the critical study. So what are we looking at? So their paragraph should be based on these big concepts. So I know we've said 2 to 3, maybe even extend 4 paragraphs just so they have another in reserve for when they are sitting there in the exam. And again, a lot of these interlink as well. So, you know, you'll often go through some and students will be like, oh, but this has similar ideas to this. And you'll be like, yeah, it does. And kids can often fall into that trap where it's like, oh, but it sounds too similar. Well, not necessarily. Each of those responses, though they might seem, or concepts, though they might seem similar, they are nuanced and they do have connections which you can make. And that's what we sort of look at for a Band 6 paragraph. We want a nuanced personal response. And that's sort of what makes it sophisticated in nature. So, yeah, there's a few things there. They're pre-prepared techniques, you know, they've got those lists. Hopefully they've been doing those technique tables. I find those are fantastic for planning
really
their
helpful.
responses. Yeah.
Because students can memorize those guilt-free and then just try and go in and use them as best as they can, like you said, in a more nuanced way, because they're going to use it now for a specific question, as opposed to just, I'm just going to record the analysis that I've memorized, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So that's where we start to see the differences between those band 4 and 5 responses with those band 6 responses, especially at the HSC marking center. What we've seen over the years is the kids that are able to adapt. Like we've had very capable students, which we've been fortunate enough to teach. And some you sort of think, oh, you're going to go in and, you know, they've written a fantastic essay and they've done well through the year because not only are they diligent, but, you know, they're very formulaic in their approach, but sometimes they miss that little nuance at the end, which, you know, doesn't allow them to tip themselves over into that band 6 range. So yeah, there are a few key things. And sometimes I will say this, sometimes it's actually hard to give feedback as teachers. I've been going through this at the moment where your brain sort of goes into a bit of lull because you're so invested in these students' work. But one of my pieces of encouragement here, especially for like the paragraph writing, is keeping it short and simple, short paragraphs, and really looking at the construction. So even when you're developing your paragraphs in practice time, get the students to identify the different parts of it. Highlighting is so powerful, you know, color coding it, it's so powerful so they can see what is going on and addressing things. Like sometimes I know I can get carried away with this as a teacher sometimes, and you'll be like, oh, that sounds excellent because the kids use some fantastic language. And then you actually go back and read it and you're just like, oh, actually, they could do better here, or they're missing this, or they're missing that. Like I had this the other day when I was looking at a response of one of my students, and fantastic. Like the language is great, and you're not saying it's not bad or anything. But again, for those band 6 responses, we're picking on those little things, and I could tell that, you know, at the end of each sort of body paragraph, there wasn't that link or that transition to the next idea into, you know, the next part of their body. And it's like in the opening part of our, like in class activities, you see that they do that, but then when they're practicing their essay questions or their full essays, sometimes they neglect that. And we can often miss that as teachers as well. So just take a step back, sometimes take that deep breath. And really, we do have ways in which we can help students improve their writing. I mean, you are the teacher, you spent 5-6 years at study, have some confidence in yourself. I've been speaking with some of our teachers and faculty at the moment and just saying, because it's often daunting. How do we give feedback?
Yeah, absolutely.
And these are the sorts of things that just have confidence in yourself. At the end of the day, you are doing the kid a service, and the kid can take it, or your student can take it however they want. But you are going in with the right reasons for, giving them these strategies. So yeah, look, very, very important. Some of those teaching strategies, like I said, keep them short and simple. Writing activities, 10 minutes max per body paragraph, maybe. So 10-minute writing
Yeah, I love that.
activities. It means that you can then get them to give it to other students, peer reviews before they give it to you, or they can go through and look at it. So it's not just you having to read a 1,200-word essay every single time. You're only reading 200 to 300-word paragraphs at a time. So yeah, those little things I think will definitely help with the level of analysis, and then the planning, for body paragraphs, especially for what is required in Mod B, being a critical study or a close study of the text.
Yeah.
If the kids aren't addressing, proper textual evidence, proper textual integrity and techniques, or not looking holistically at the way that they're framing their ideas, or providing that sort of discourse in terms of their discussion, then those are elements which we can often sort of work on in order for them to improve.
Absolutely. I think you made a really important point there, where the reason why it's so beneficial to do these mock strategies is a student in more calm, less time pressure conditions might be doing everything they need to do in that body paragraph, but the sheer aspect of just them now going into a mock condition might mean that, oh, they forget this part, or they don't do this part. And that's such a powerful bit of feedback in itself, because you can help the student become aware of what they miss or what they kind of skip over when those exam conditions come in. And then that becomes great insight for that student to remember, oh, I've really got to make sure, I hit that link, or whatever it is. And so I think sometimes what I suggest as well to my guys is just like how they might have that rubric generic based, thesis or skeleton thesis, they can do a very similar thing with the topic sentence and the link sentence. Then that way it might take pressure off. They're not starting from scratch. But I feel like the body paragraphs in your band sixes, what they do is they don't just top and end that link back to thesis.
No.
They do it at least a few times within the body. So like one way, I think maybe, through the body, like one way they might do it is, when they're actually analyzing, the evidence, but they might be then also creating that analytical commentary on like back to the rubric, back to the question, back to purpose. And so I think there's like layers. There's like, on one hand, let's just get my ideas down. On a second hand, let's actually use my evidence correctly. And then there's like that third layer of, and now it all has to come together to hit the question for a more sustained response. And exactly like you said, those layers, they need to be built upon in these practice sections. And it's all a process. Like you can't jump from the first layer into the third. Like they all have to, oh, I've done this now got to work on. That's why we always say to our guys, you need to start memorizing and preparing weeks before, because you can't just do it, jump from one to the other. So I think what you gave was some extremely, extremely practical strategies for sure. Okay. Thank you so much. Let's do then question 4 for our listeners. So this is now talking a little bit more about our evidence. So how do we encourage students to use their evidence effectively and analytically under time constraints? And I know I just touched on that idea of, and you talked a bit about it too, that we don't just want the students to just, and let's list my evidence. Oh, and this quote had a simile and that quote had a metaphor. It's always going to get back to but what, like, because that's what your band 4s and that will do, right? You're like, okay, but like, why? And then even your band 3s will just be like, oh, me too. Because it's like, you're not, okay, we all know that that's a simile. We all know that's a metaphor. It's like, what's the purpose of it? What's the function of this technique? I know one of my mentors always used to use that word. It really helped frame it in my brain. Like, okay, we know that's a metaphor. And what's the function of the metaphor, not only within that line, but the function of that language feature to the rubric, to the question, to the big picture, like purpose of what's happening. Yeah,
I like that word function. It's very important, and that's probably the key thing that you want to take away if you're a teacher listening, and even a student listening. how does that technique function for your purpose? That's like, how is it building towards your purpose? And you just mentioned this really nicely in the last sort of question there. If you read some of those exemplar responses from the HSC, or you've got good responses over the years given to you, or even you've had your own students develop them, you'll note that lots of those students, literally every sentence of their paragraph will link back to their thesis.
Yeah.
It's in some way trying to build that airtight sort of argument or that case for why their thesis is important. So similarly, we start to look at quotations here. Please do not, like, if someone says this to me, like if I see this in a student where they'll like maybe write a line and be like, this is a metaphor, and you'd be like, okay, cool. Like
yeah. And
like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We know what a metaphor is, but like, well, how about you extend that a little bit? Well, does it function maybe as an extended metaphor through the whole piece? Because that actually tells you like a little bit as a marker, be like, okay, cool. Like, have they just read the first chapter of the novel that they might have been studying? Like, I know, for example, if we're doing Ishiguro again as an example for us, or even like, let's say Curious Incident for Standard English, which is another text that we sort of looked at.
Another big one.
Yeah. A lot of the time, students will often just, look at the literal language of Christopher Boone in the text, and then they fail to realize things like the form and the function of the novel. They fail to realize Mark Haddon's context as to the way it has helped shape, the writing of this narrative, which is amazing. Written through the eyes of a young man that is, or this young man that's part of like that ASD spectrum, and it's like then you clearly start to understand why the text is written in terms of its specific sort of unique distinctive style, those distinctive qualities that we sort of look at. I mean, this used to be called, the module B unit used to be called like a distinctively visual or distinctive qualities for standard English back in the day, and it was like quite interesting, like looking at this. But even like Ishiguro, for example, I'll know that if a student just looks at the fallibility of memory through the metaphor of the bridge of hesitation right at the beginning of the novel, which is sort of introduced in the opening sequences in 1948 there, where we just like, okay, cool. But then how does that bridge of hesitation then function throughout the entirety of the text? What are those sort of different parts of the text, beginning, middle, and end, that you can start to look at? And then you frame it as an extended metaphor or a motif that runs through the entirety of the text.
I was just going to say, a lot of these techniques are like connected. So like when you get your form techniques, you start to see that they're all connected to build this big picture. And so you naturally start deepening the analysis as you go from connection to connection.
That's right. You make those links, and it's not just, I've identified one technique. No, look at multiple techniques together. How do they work? How does form, language, style work together to actually come together and support the idea that you've framed in your thesis statement? So again, when we're looking at how to use these effectively, if they have not got their technique tables, I mean, start this term already. Like it's something that we've been taught. We're not recreating the wheel. We've been taught this since the 2000s when we were doing our HSC, early 2000s, and it's just like, okay, cool. Once you've memorized these sort of quotations, please also, like, a lot of students get daunted. They're like, I have to remember copious amounts of texts. But I would say having those short sort of versatile quotes that link with those rubric statements. So going back to what we sort of said at the beginning, understand your rubric, then, knowing your text inside out. Like, those are the big things. So these short versatile sort of quotations often have a more seamless sort of embedding within the sentences. You might even use a word here or there as a quote.
A phrase. Absolutely.
That works. You know what I mean? Like, it sort of works a lot better. So that's big. And then in each of your body paragraphs, say you're doing a 3-body paragraph essay structure, I would tell my kids, like, every time you mention a form of technique or something to do with form or language, you need to back it up. Whether that be 3 minimum quotes, I'd like to say 4 to 5 per body paragraph.
Me too.
And ensuring they're relevant to the question as well. But again, you start with that base of 3 minimum. If they're not doing 3 techniques, well, yeah. But and again, like techniques and quotations. And again, it just comes with more and more practice. The more they practice, the more they memorize it, the more they develop those technique tables and the quotation tables, the easier it'll become for them because it becomes second nature to them.
Yeah, I think you've highlighted something really important here that gets done quite early on in the process before they get to like trial or HSC is like strategizing their analysis in their body paragraph, like having that kind of anchor rubric idea, having a key concern that might help anchor it. Then, like you said really well, picking, I think you said a form, kind of like a form, a language, like a contextual feature, and kind of connecting it all together. Because I think students, if they're going with the skeleton, they can really map out across those 3 body paragraphs a very holistic interpretation. And my preference as a teacher when reading and looking is I prefer more holistic interpretations because I think that they work, they're a lot more malleable in terms of like exam conditions. But don't get me wrong, occasionally I have students have really beautiful like finesse specific approaches. It's just then are they going to be able to replicate that in an effective way with a question that might be very different to maybe what they were preparing. So I really think you mentioned some great ideas where like you're planning and you're plotting and you're picking, you're selecting your quotes that kind of work very holistically and are a bit shorter. And so that takes a lot of the pressure off too, because then when students start practicing, they will see that by doing that strategy, that in the long run, it's easier to engage with unseen questions because you're not going to get stumped and go, oh, well, I actually don't have analysis that would work with that question.
Yeah, no, 100%.
All right. We might get into then our last section, Adriel. So before we offer some final tips, let's just suggest to students or to teachers teaching, this strategy, what are some ways that students can kind of make sure they end well? So kind of conclude with their personal responses here in Module B. And, if they happen to have any spare time, what are some things that they can do when they're getting to, let's say, the last few minutes of that 40-minute for the Module B?
Yeah. I won't go too much into like how to write your conclusions. We did a whole episode on this. So
yeah. Thank you.
Have a listen to that. I think it
was a good one,
going to help
guys.
you. But yeah, just making sure your conclusion basically summates what you've spoken about. It's that closing argument. Don't add new ideas. Don't just repeat things as well. So like a lot of the times we'll say like just summarize what happened in your essay, and like that's wrong. I would say your conclusion needs to be insightful. So it's an insightful conclusion. Like, why was your thesis important at the end of the day?
Yeah.
And you sort of link it that way. That's probably the big thing. Why and how have you used your argument to frame this idea? So that's big for the conclusions. When we start to look at like some of the things that we want to get our kids to think, if they do have spare time, because again, there shouldn't be any moments in the text where they're just sort of sitting without their pen on the page. But here, like if they do have some time at the end, making sure that they review their topic sentences, that's probably very important. So does it align with what they've introduced in the thesis statement? They can then go through the body paragraph and maybe start to just look at a little bit of cohesion. So read it out aloud in their head, obviously not in the exam, but in their practice spaces, just read your responses out loud. Look at the flow. Think about the flow. Then you start using language that will definitely help you when you do come to writing the real thing, and consider the way that they've used their rubric terms. Have you introduced enough? A lot of the time students will get so worried that they'll add like unnecessary things. And that's often like a sign of someone that might not be as prepared as they should have been in developing these conclusions, or even, using that time.
Because they'll just ramble.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, my big one would just be making sure your thesis, your topic sentences align with your thesis statement, and your conclusion summates everything in a nuanced manner. That would be my big things to look at. I would not go through and add new things or change too much, because then you'll just disrupt the flow of your whole essay. That would be my big thing. Yeah.
I think as well, yeah, I'm a big fan of a quick skim read for general editing, because I know, like, when I'm marking, if there are lots of parts in the essay that have like general grammatical issues or are missing words, and we give a benefit of the doubt because we know kids are writing quickly and it's exam conditions, but occasionally I come across papers that like have that error so much in there that it becomes a bit more of a chore to try and maintain their thesis. Like, it's just, I think sometimes students underestimate how much writing legibly and having general good clear grammar impacts your marker trying to actually process what you're saying. Because I think also, remember, like, when you're marking these sections, you're marking multiple hours on end, back to back to back. So unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of I'll mark 1 or 2 a day and therefore I'll be fresh. But like, even, you talk about this a lot as well, the way that it works in the HSC, it's next paper, next paper, next paper. And so unfortunately, if your paper's not very legible or there's big kind of grammatical issues, you might be in that respect impacting the flow and the argument of your response as well. So very brief, if you have, I don't know many that do, but if you have a couple of minutes, I think the strategies we've suggested are really good. And then again, I think going in with that semi-preparation, it's going to help you stick within time. It's going to help you write with flow and with clarity. And it's going to help you make sure that you have the time necessary, exactly as you said, Adriel, to get to that thesis, make sure you're referencing it, especially within that topic and link. And then, so I think that all of that definitely any other final tips before we wrap up? I mean, you've certainly covered a lot for us today.
No, not really, just practice. That's a big thing. And then,
I
like you
agree.
mentioned that you mentioned that idea of legibility. It's about creating, we mentioned this in previous episodes as well, you're creating a good impression in the mind of your marker. So
that's a great way to
making
put it.
sure that the writing is good. You want to create good impressions, because if you are making consistent errors, yes, we look to give those marks, but you're not really addressing then the final dot point, which is often seen in a lot of those exams there. It's about your language, clarity of the writing,
organized,
expression, all that sort of
developed.
stuff.
That's right. Yeah,
Exactly
you're
right.
absolutely
So
right.
you're creating the wrong impression there. But apart from that, practice, practice, practice. Remember, this is a critical, close study of the text, so you need to know your text inside out. And listen to our essay episodes if you want to have a bit more specificity in terms of how to actually build these Band 6 essays. And we go through in quite a bit of depth as to how to do that. But apart from that, keep going. You guys are doing well. And
Thank you. We hope you've all really enjoyed this episode on Module B in preparation for the trials. We definitely have a Module C that's going to come up shortly as well. And as always, we would love you guys to engage with us on our social media platforms. Like, subscribe, share your episodes. We've been creating a lot more YouTube shorts as well that might be really handy for you to use, like within the classroom, 3 to 5 minute episodes. So we really hope that we're helping, and we would love for you guys to continue that engagement with us. So thank you so much.